I'm going to be reading James 4:13-17 today. Boasting about tomorrow. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why do you even know what will happen tomorrow? What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is a sin for them.
I was just talking to Luke Goodwin earlier this morning, and he said that he hadn't heard this passage preached on much. And I kind of wonder whether it's because it kind of preaches itself. It's brilliant. I'm really appreciating being given this one this morning. You who say today or tomorrow, we will go here or do this and that, shame on you. Instead, you should seek God's will. Don't do bad stuff like that. Do good stuff like that. It's just that straightforward, right? Really simple. Could just about close in prayer. Is the jug ball, Jeff? The best part of it is that this really isn't even about me. I come from a long line of people that don't go from city to city and do this other stuff. My dad left school at 15 and got a job, and then he retired at 65. Same firm. His whole life. He built a house when he was like 23, and he still lives there 60-odd years later. We're not skipping from city to city as us Forrests. So this makes it even easier for me to preach to whoever it is out there that does this and tell you off. Instead, you should do this. It's too easy. Love it. Let me just metaphorically get off my high horse. It's not that simple. Please tell me it's not that simple. If we take it that simplistically, we've got to have missed something, right? There's always a couple of things that help us understand what a passage is really on about. One of them is context, like what it's actually about, and actually reflecting on who we are that's reading it. What are we bringing into it? A couple of things that we can understand that help us make sense of this. First thing is how James is written, the style that he's writing in. And the second is how we are written. It's already been said in this series that James is written in a style called wisdom writing. Now, it doesn't just mean that he writes really wise stuff, I mean he does, but it's actually a style of writing that's quite distinct from other styles of writing. In the New Testament, we have a lot of letters written by Paul, and they're occasional writings. He's writing to a specific thing that's going on in that church. James kind of doesn't. It is a letter, but it's wisdom writing. We have examples of wisdom writing in the Old Testament, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Some of the Psalms are written in the style, and they have a really distinct way of writing that it's actually important for us to understand. An example from our time now is you open the newspaper. You have different styles of writing within the newspaper. You go to the world news and you read what's going on. There's this war in Ukraine that's terrible. Awful things are happening. And then you go to the sports page and something terrible happened in Dunedin. New Zealand was slaughtered by Ireland. And it's like, but we know it's not the same thing, right? Sorry, is that too soon? I'm a dual citizen. Like, I've got an Irish citizenship, so I don't care. I just support whoever wins. Awesome. Anyway, there are two different styles of writing. The sports writer doesn't explain, I'm using metaphor that there was a bloodbath sort of where we know it's something different. And that informs how we read it, what's going on. An example from the Old Testament is it uses vivid contrasts. Wisdom uses contrasts. Psalm 1 talks about, and Psalm 1, the first Psalm's a wisdom psalm. That person, the righteous person, is like a tree planted by streams of water who yields its fruit in season. Whatever he does prospers. It's beautiful, right? Not so the wicked. They're like chaff that the wind blows away. It's this super contrast, this really righteous, holy person and this really terrible, terrible person. And the reality is that neither of us are really either of those. We're somewhere in the middle. In fact, I think that these aren't necessarily talking about two different sorts of people, but actually two different ways that all of us can be present in our world. We can seek that path or this path, and it makes it clear what those look like. Another feature from wisdom writing is caricature. The writers use this really exaggerated style of a person to make a really subtle point. Proverbs talks about the unruly woman, the Madam Folly, he calls her. And she sits at the door of her house, calling out to those who pass by, let all who are simple come to my house. But little do they know that the dead are there. that her guests are deep in the realm of the dead. Now, if you see someone this obvious calling from the front steps of a house, don't go there. That's not going to end well. But it's not just about that. There's certainly a sexual or a moral ethic about, adultery and stuff like that, but it's far more subtle than that. It's all the ways that in our day-to-day lives we can be drawn away to the things that drag us from the direction that God called us to. It's far more subtle than that. And when we understand that nuance, we can see that it's actually about the underlying motivations that we can be present in our world, the ways that we can operate. And truth be told, we can kind of swing from either a good path to the right path, sometimes frighteningly quick. When you've been in your quiet time in the morning and you're just so close to God, and then you get in your car and you're driving to work, and thank you for this day, Lord, and thank you for this person who just pulled out in front of me. What the heck, am I invisible? And we go from one to the other quick, don't we? What's underneath that? What motivates us? Welcome to the wonderful world of the human ego. How we're wired. See, Psalm 139 talks about how we are created beautiful in our mother's womb. We are fearfully and wonderfully made, created in the depths, knitted together by God. We're shaped and formed by the hands of God. Beautiful. There's something innately good about us. Yet at the same time, no one is righteous. No one is, not even one. There's no one who understands, no one who seeks God. It's like we're all beautifully created, yet fundamentally flawed. Like how are those both true? Theologians kind of term this as false self versus true self. There's kind of two parts warring within us. Paul talks about putting off the old self, corrupt and deceitful, and putting on the new self, created to be like God. We all have these two things within us warring against each other. Jesus talked about the flesh nature that we have to put aside. The Old Testament, chaff that the wind blows away, this part of us that isn't fully us. Genesis tells the story of how we were once in the garden of abundance. Eden means abundance. We were in God's presence, and we were naked and without shame. That wasn't a comment on our attire at the time. There was nothing between us and God. There was nothing between us and each other. There was something authentically real about us. But this voice of doubt enters that says, in effect, is God truly good? Or maybe more to the point, is God truly good towards you? And this voice of doubt starts this mechanism of wondering, well, what if? What if it's not going to work out? What if God isn't? I need to do something to protect myself, to look after myself, to shield myself from whatever. And that thought process, that motivation starts this chain of events of things that unravel all of us. Sin is an unwillingness to trust that what God wants for me is only my deepest happiness. Trust is at the root of that. Recently heard it worded like this. When they sinned, they realized they were naked. They became self-conscious. For the first time, human beings felt the need to cover up, to hide certain parts of themselves, while showing other parts of themselves, to put on a best self, a public self. Fig leaves, that's what they covered themselves with. That was the world's first attempt to control perception, and since that day, we've never stopped feeling the need to do the same. What Genesis called fig leaves, we call shame. That underlying fear-based thing that says something's not right with me. And as children, we learn to do this. Even in those of us who grew up in, and I realise this isn't true for everyone, but I grew up in a really loving, nurturing environment. But there was still just, as I look back, I can see this thought that I don't know if I'm accepted exactly as I am. Therefore, I have to kind of build this better way of being, because those guys over there, they're more accepted for who they are than I am, so I'm going to try and be like them. I never consciously thought that, but I can see how I did it subconsciously. You put on this persona, this way of being in your world that protects the vulnerable parts of you, and project something that is manufactured and not fully real. It's not how God actually created me to be. And, that got me through adolescence, and it gave me a sense of esteem, but it was always it was always a trying to fit into my world, because there was a doubt that who I really was enough. We all do that. You all do that. Without me knowing all of you personally, I know you do that, because as far as I can tell, you're all human. This is what we do. You might be thinking to yourself right now, what the heck is this new age self-taught psychobabble, Forrest? Like, what the heck are you on about? And what the heck has this got to do with James? Great question. Glad you asked. This has actually got a lot to do with James. And it's not new age. I'm not expecting you to write those quotes down, but the people quoted there, let me know myself, a lower knowledge of myself, without knowledge of self, self-knowledge, without understanding this. This is something that's actually gone through, these are some of the heaviest hitters in the forming of the Christian church over 2,000 years. They believe this. And actually our current culture has moved away from this a little bit, because one, it's a bit uncomfortable, and two, we've got stuff to do, stuff to make, which is all well and fine. But unless we understand who we are, we don't understand how we come to God or how we are with each other. We do not see things as they are. We see things as we are. The things that shape and form us. The word persona literally means, in Latin, mask. These things we put on that we hide behind. We all do it. You all do it different from me, but you do it. The ways that you appear strong and in control of your environment, but underneath there's the scare of vulnerability, because I'm not sure that I'm strong enough, and I'm not sure what will happen if I'm shown to be weak. Or, that can come with a boasting sort of a way, and believe me, I can be a boaster trying to project this, I've got it in control, when underneath I'm this turbulent creature that doesn't believe that I'm actually enough. Some people are these beautiful, nurturing creatures that just love everyone around them, but it comes from a needing to be seen, to be loved, and there's actually something behind that that is trying to be seen. What does James have to do with this? Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow, those futurists, entrepreneurial types. Thing is, we all live in our tomorrows in a way, because we're slightly disquieted in our nows. That sense of shame, and by the way, the difference between guilt and shame, guilt is we've done something wrong. That's natural. Shame says there's something wrong with me. That's not from God. We are disconnected from God. We are disconnected from each other, but that doesn't mean that we're broken. We are beautifully and intricately made by the hands of God. But when we escape our what's wrong with us and try to move past it quickly, try to move into the future, trying to move into controlling that thing that happens tomorrow, we're going to try and build a business is fine. I love our entrepreneurs. They're the ones that give us employment. They're the ones that do all these great things in our places. But it's all of us, as we try to escape feeling what we feel in the now, trying to get into the next thing, trying to, this futurism. As it is, you boast. Boasting comes from comparison, comparing ourselves with the people around us that, I'm doing better than that guy, which makes me feel good about myself. But actually, I'm feeling a little bit insecure next to that guy who's got the nicer house and the nicer car and all the rest of it. We all do that. James is pointing this out. You who say, you see, the caricature is not these people that do this grand stuff. He's like, you do this in a way. And it draws you out of your present. When we're fixated on our futures, we can never truly be here. Truly be here. We can never truly feel what's real right now because we gloss over it and try to move on. God is present. So how are you hiding? Honestly, what parts of you, if you're honest, are you most scared to bring into God's light? Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will. Cool. How do we know that? If it's God's will, well, how do we know? It starts with being grounded for a start and not living in the future, but actually being here in God's presence, abiding in rather than hiding behind our facades. Actually sitting long enough in God's presence to allow who He calls us to be to seep in past our heads into our hearts. That takes time. If it is the Lord's will. Lord's will, what we do? It's perhaps far more important in God's mind, not what we do, but who we're becoming. The most important thing in your life is not what you want to do, it's who you become. It's what's known as formation. The problem with formation is it takes time, and it can be a bit brutal as God starts to point out those little things in us that like, oh yeah, I know I do that, God. And we're scared to even bring ourselves to that place of sitting in God and actually bringing our shadow stuff to Him, because we're scared He's going to judge us, because we've been judging ourselves for it for so long. Shame. But God, in my experience, like honestly, I've been on this journey of learning to do this and over the last couple of years, and God just continues to surprise me that I come to Him scared to bring this thing towards Him that I see, and God just cuts past it and says, let's talk about that thing over there. That gift that I've given you that you've used or hidden or avoided, this part of how I made you to really be in this world. And the same for you. You're all uniquely created, but we all find ways to hide. Being shaped and formed by God takes time. It's slow, it's hard, it can be a bit brutal, deflating our personas, our egos. But God is interested in the real you. The real you. And that takes slowing down. So if anyone then knows the good that they ought to do and doesn't do it, it's sin for them. That's how James finishes this little section. A lot of us have a complex relationship with that word sin, right? It's pretty brutal, those terrible things that you've always done. And I don't know, is that our shame thing going on? I'm not trying to minimize sin, but it's when it kicks into being condemned for what we do. No, God doesn't condemn us. Jesus, for God so loved the world that He sent His one and only Son, right? John 3:16, we forget John 3:17. Jesus came not into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. God's voice is not a condemning voice. It might be a convicting voice, but it's not a condemning voice. Here's another way of looking at sin. Sin is not a deviation from an original state, but from what will be. Put another way, we have to think of history as a movement consisting of two kinds of directions. I talked about it at the start, right? These two ways we can be present in the world. One is the direction towards the end for which the world was created, the way that God always imagined our place to be. And the other way is away from this end. Since the end decides finally about the truth of history, only those events, only those things within us that we choose that lead to the end will be shown to possess true being. It's wordy. Let me just explain that a little bit further, because I think this is so important. Those things that we choose each day, not the grand things, but the small things, the minute things, the things that will lead us closer to God, the little decisions. in the end, they will be shown to be true and to be real, like a tree planted beside streams of water. And the things that we choose for ourselves, whether it's just those little grabs, or the not just the things that come from the boasting, but the things that come from the self-protection, the things that come from that doubt that God's truly good, and I've got to protect my KiwiSaver, I've got to worry, I've spent so much part of my life worrying about what's going to happen, and it never happened. So much mental real estate going into the things that never came to pass because they were chaff, they were never real. The ways that I've compared myself with other people's masks, and I was comparing myself with something that wasn't real because they were struggling too, and I just never knew. Living out there somewhere rather than truly being here. You're a mist. No, we're created eternity in our hearts, but those parts of us out there, they vapor. And we know the end. You've read Revelation, right? How it ends. God's kingdom comes down to this place, to earth, and everything will be as it's meant to be. We will be God's people and He will be our God. I could make you feel terrible about the way you're living right now because you know you're not doing that. God knows. God knows. Psalm 139 again. God knows every part of your life before it even happened. Every word you say. He knows right where you are. He knows what's going on. And He's just asking you to come. He's not asking you to come with it all together. No. He's just asking you to come. He's not asking you to put all your masks down. He's asking you to bring them so that He can start to draw out what's truly real about you. This is how it starts. The deceptively simple act of pausing, even just for a few minutes each day, can be a form of peacemaking with our own battle-weary souls. Just coming to God honestly for a short period of time each day, whether it's morning, whether it's lunchtime, whether it's whenever, just coming, not with our agendas, but just being with God and allowing Him to speak into us. That's hard because it's countercultural. We learn to keep going, keep moving, keep achieving, keep striving, keep all of this stuff. And we're bombarded with comparison culture and social media and advertising and all the rest of it. It's countercultural. We have to turn down the volume of that noise and find a place where we can sit in God's presence. 4 little tips. Firstly, befriend silence. That's countercultural. We keep the radio up in our culture. Befriend silence. Silence can be frightening. We can turn down the external noise and have the internal noise within us. Sometimes all sorts of stuff starts to come at us. God knows. He knows you. He sees you. Just do that with a pen and a paper and just write down your thoughts so that you can get them out. Write down honest prayers. Normalize boredom, because actually this is not a glamorous way of praying. This is a real way of praying, being really, truly honest with God. And believe me, the times when God's voice booms from the sky to you, if that ever happens to you, let me know, because it hasn't happened to me. It doesn't work like that. God's first language is silence. When God appeared to Elijah had hidden in the cave, right, and there was the earthquake and there was the storm. And our NIV translates it as in the whisper, but the actual Hebrew says, and God spoke in sheer silence. Being used to mundane, the day-to-day, God being in our ordinary. Reframe distractions. A lot of reasons why people don't do this. I just get distracted. I'm terrible at this. I sit down for 10 minutes and I'm just distracted 100 times. Fantastic. It's 100 opportunities to turn your mind back to God. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. creating this muscle memory of coming back to God. Keep practicing. You never nail it. You never master it. But God comes into our turning up. God sees our trying. And allow God to set the agenda. We so often come to prayer times with this list of things that we want to do, these things for our futures that we want God to bless and sort and help us fix and all the rest of it. And God's like, I want to show you what I want you to be in this place, who I'm forming you to be. Forms of prayer that help us abide in God. Regular, simple, turning up, same place, same time, rhythms of silence, solitude, stillness. These aren't just self-help anti-anxiety antidotes. These are the secret spaces we created where God meets us, joins us, speaks to us, slowly forms us back into the people he always imagined us to be before the world got its hands on us. Before we were shaped and misformed, he's calling us back to that. It's where he names us and defines us. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a world that's just a big fat mess out there at the moment. There's all sorts going on, and people are disturbed, people are disquieted, people are anxious. And it's so easy for us as a church and as Christians and in ourselves to be caught up in the busyness or try and control it or reframe or reorder or restructure the way we do what we do, rather than actually just being present ourselves and allowing a non-anxious God to create non-anxious people in us. That we can truly be present, that we can truly relate and commune to the people around us who are thirsty. And it starts with us turning up, sitting in God's presence and saying, "Good morning, Father. What do you want to show me this morning?" We're going to do communion now. And this is a little opportunity perhaps to just try this, as scary as it might be. We're not going to have any music. We're just going to have silence. And communion, through 2,000 years of the Christian church, has been when people gathered to break bread, to drink, to share the blood of Jesus, and to remember him. Remember. And there's been this belief through the Christian church over that time that somehow Jesus is present among us. I can't make sense of that. It's mystical, it's weird, but Jesus is actually present. He's actually with us. So we come as a people together, a collection of people from our own places, our own spaces. Take this bread. Remember that Jesus gave his life for us. Take this blood, this wine, this juice to remember that Jesus was poured out for us. He was truly present and real. He calls us to be the same. Jesus saves us from our sin and wants to salve us from our wounds, from all of our stuff. Reframe us, reform us, reshape us. As we sit in that this morning, just ask, Father, show me how to truly be here.